This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. How are you today, Brian?
I'm all right. I have a new chair.
Tell me about your chair, because I remember you were sitting on a very uncomfortable surface, because I was there. We used to be, before the pandemic, we were together in your bomb shelter, and you had kitchen chairs from the 1910s, and they were very uncomfortable and very precarious, I might add.
Yeah, but it served the podcast well because, you know, they're so uncomfortable, it kept everything moving at a good clip because you wanted to wrap up the show and get off those horrible chairs.
Unlike now, where I'm in a comfortable chair and I go on in my diatribes for hours and hours, and I'm going to try not to do that this week. I'm going to try and do things better. How was your week? Getting ready for teaching film class over the web. How's that working out?
Yeah, and that's why I have the better chair here, and it's still not a great one. It's my son's cast-off gaming chair, but yeah, I thought since I'm going to be teaching down here, I need something more than the horrible chairs, so it's a slightly less horrible chair. And I got a new hat. My Seattle Kraken hat finally came in the mail.
Congratulations.
Yeah, so I'm officially now a Seattle Kraken fan.
Are you wearing that during the telecast from your basement for the kids?
I'm not, but I'll say yes because it's just audio. Who knows?
All right. Have you got a theme song for your show?
No, I have not done that.
Well, here's one. I'm going to do it on the fly here.
Okay.
Brian's movie class. Brian's movie class. Is he wearing pants? Brian's movie class. Brian's movie. I don't know, something like that. You can use
that's
that
excellent.
if you want.
You just came up with that off the top of your head?
Just off the top of my head, yes.
Wow.
Well, I didn't. The music comes elsewhere, but yeah, you know, I think it would really jazz up your class and get people. You know, film students are notoriously sleepy.
Oh yeah,
all university students are. So this would really get them in the mood if you gave them a big blast. Brian, you know, last week we mentioned Ed Whittingham.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to be the head of the Pembina Institute in Alberta, which looks at the energy industry and improving it for environmental reasons. And then he was a big advisor in the Alberta government. And he's got his own podcast, and I have a clip, so let's listen and talk.
Hello, and welcome everyone to our third live webinar from Quarantine Quarters here in Alberta. My name is Ed Whittingham. I'm a clean energy policy and project consultant.
Two things. First of all, he says Whittingham. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, that's quite striking.
Which makes me think he's not a Whittingham.
Different branch.
He doesn't sound like a Whittingham. He sounds like an Albertan, which is like, has a tinge of cattle in it. Sort of a twangy cattle, a Texas sort of Alberta accent. So I don't know, maybe he was just raised there and that's the way it worked out for him. But no, I'm looking at him and I'm thinking I have doubts that he's my relative, but we did have a series of relatives and he sort of adds up to the right age of somebody who would be one of my half cousins. So we'll see. I don't know. Mm-hmm. On the show this week, Brian, I want to continue a bit of my talk from last week about the disruption. And this has been very controversial with our listeners. They're not all buying on, and I don't blame them. Mm-hmm. But Tony Seba and his partner at the ReThinkX, I gave you the wrong web address last week. It's ReThinkX.com. Now, you can spend $40 on the Amazon book, or you can download his book for free. And I did read a lot of it, not the important parts. It's a dry academic read, but very enlightening, and I want to keep coming back to that. It's very interesting. So I found that he was on a BBC documentary on the BBC Radio Business report. He's been on there a few times, and so has his partner. And I wanted to bring some clips and just talk a little bit more about that this week, and also summarize his recipe for moving forward, given his outlook on disruption on food, agriculture, transportation, and energy, what we should be doing. And guess what? He's not in favor of a carbon tax. He thinks a carbon tax is not necessary, but he also thinks that the governments should get out of subsidizing oil, and I'm sure everyone listening to this show is in agreement with that. But what do you want to talk about this week?
Well, I want to bring back the green energy pet peeves segment.
Okay.
And then a couple of news stories, but I don't have too much in the way of news this week.
Well, I do, and it's going to be a jam-packed show again, kids. We're on YouTube. Check us out, because we're going to try putting some video up there, more video all the time, and maybe even experiment with videoing. I sound like the guy from SCTV, Jerry Todd. We'll be videoing the show. I never understood where he got all that expensive equipment in his home.
Yeah,
because they're all analog switchers and such, and now you can just do this stuff with a laptop and a couple $100. But anyway, yes, check out our YouTube channel, The Clean Energy Show, and we're on Twitter, Clean Energy Pod. You want to check us out there. We'd like to hear from you on Twitter. A lot of people have spoken to us on Twitter, and we have some of those comments shortly. And then our email is cleanenergyshow, one word, at gmail.com. That's cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And we have the SpeakPipe account where you can leave us a voicemail by pushing a button and recording us a message, which we can include on the show. We love that. It's speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And it is, what is the date today? It's the 8th?
Yeah, September 9th.
September 9th. My kids are going back to school today, so it's weird. It's weird to see kids in the school ground across the street. We'll probably hear them later. Yeah, so let's get into the show. Brian, you go first.
Well, we were talking about the Lucid car last week, and they have confirmed the price, and it's going to range from $80,000 to $169,000, which is a little better than I thought. It's obviously an expensive luxury car. These are US dollars. But starting at 80 is not too bad. That's kind of in the range of competing with Tesla's higher end cars.
You know, it isn't too bad, is it? I mean, 80,000, but it goes all the way up to 160,000 US, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So it's both good and bad. I mean, that's quite a difference. I mean, my first house cost $50,000.
Yeah.
And my second one didn't cost much more than the full price of the upper end of that car. So, yeah, I don't know what to think about that. It's certainly not a mass car, and that's one thing that we like to talk about on the show is getting EVs to the masses and as quickly as possible. To improve adoption, to get familiarity in the marketplace, and just to get pollution out of the air. So, by the way, Ed Whittingham was on the Twitter bragging that he got 800 comments for that Globe and Mail story that you brought up last week, which was a 3-person op-ed on the oil industry. And what was it about again? Was it about sort of a green recovery type of thing?
I closed the tab, but yeah, it was how we should not be further subsidizing fossil fuels. And if there's going to be subsidies, they should be green, something like that.
Well, he got 800 comments and he was bragging about that. And I got 1,000 comments on my CBC op-ed that went national on ending Earth Day a year ago on Earth Day.
So the other Whittingham can suck it.
He can suck it. But you know what, Brian? The man has made a good living all of his life being a clean energy consultant and think tank person. Me? I don't make anything.
We're going to have to start a Patreon or something for the podcast.
Patreon, or we're going to have to start doing product placement. Delicious Pepsi. Or something like that. I don't know. What else could we do? Maybe a home charger or something. We could endorse them.
Yeah. Any sponsors, hit us up.
All right. Well, we'll get to the feedback now. Question from Tweeter Moby. And this came in last night, and I didn't have an answer to it. So I wanted to ask. I said I'd ask on the show, and we would talk about it. I believe Tweeter Moby, according to his profile picture, is a cow with a Twitter account. Okay. Which is unusual. So being on board for clean energy also means you are on board for plant-based foods. So do you endorse, I mean, what does that mean? Does it mean that, yes, we have to eat plant-based foods if you're if you're going to be a gung-ho clean person, that you have to go and eat the plant-based foods?
No, well, first of all, I don't think anyone's against plant-based foods. I mean, we all eat plant-based foods now.
Sure.
So I think, yeah, maybe people were just surprised by the leap where suddenly we're a clean energy show and we're talking about plant-based foods, but I think it's all related.
It is related. It's technology. In fact, they're calling it food software, because places like Harvard and wherever MIT would be able to design a food and then you could download it to your essentially a brewery type of place, and that's going to take place outside towns where the food is needed, cities where the food is needed. And my son was asking me about this, and he asked me if wheat would be replaced, because he was looking at the climate changes for Canada at the end of his life, say at the end of this century. And he said that the only thing you'll be able to grow where we live is wheat, which is mostly what we grow now. But the changes will eliminate other crops, according to his research.
I saw a really good documentary on CBC a while ago. I believe it's on the GEM site. I wish I could remember the name of the series, but they profiled this company in Montreal that's built a greenhouse on the top of a warehouse building. And it's all hydroponic agriculture in the middle of Montreal. And the idea being that, grow the food where it's needed, where you're going to eat it. And by putting it on the top of this already existing warehouse building, you capture a lot of the heat already, like the building already has a certain amount of heat. So like the cost of running it is lower, and the cost of transportation of all the food. People can subscribe to the service and you get fresh veggies picked and then delivered to your house. It was quite interesting.
Okay. I love that. I always thought that was the technology of the future that's going to change things. But there's more to it than that, and we'll get to that in a second. But I love that. I was really moved when I saw that, up in the north part of Canada, like right in the Arctic where hardly anyone lives, and it's really cold, and there's no roads. You have to fly everything in, and the food is incredibly expensive and not fresh, and there's not a lot of healthy food because the vegetables don't make it up there without costing a fortune and being, half dead. So, yeah, when they were doing that up there in like a container, like a shipping container, I thought, wow, that's a tremendous thing to do. And then you can run solar panels outside and wind turbines, small-scale wind turbines to power the LEDs. LEDs are a big change. We look at technology, how it's changing the world and improving climate. Well, LEDs was a big one. Mm-hmm. That sort of energy efficiency is really reduced the demand. The growing demand for electricity has slowed it down a lot better than if we didn't have LEDs. And when it comes to growing food, LEDs are fantastic because I don't know how I found this out, but I was reading about marijuana plants.
I wonder how.
I don't know why I have an interest in that, but they had, like recipes for specific color temperatures at different times of the year while you're growing this plant indoors in your closet. Right. Which I believe you could do in Canada now. You can grow like 3 plants in your closet. So you'll get mold in there though. Yeah, and it was and you can fine tune the plants, the color temperature for the plant, and even change it throughout the day or the season, which I find cool. As a person who thinks that technology is a cool way to solve problems, that was very interesting to me. So, got another one, and this is regarding SaskPower and the government involvement in utilities. Michael says, the Saskatchewan government has a monopoly on the production and sale of electricity, so they end up subsidizing old technology. Free the market. Power from the people is the power to the people. Now, you would not find a more pro-SaskPower, pro-government utility person out there. And the reason is because they're not making profit, they're not charging you more than they need to. However, this is something we'll talk about later. I'm now questioning my devotion to Crown Corporation utilities because I think that they are getting in the way of the free market, because SEBA's think tank here is saying that the best part of the clean energy revolution is that the free market's going to take care of it, but you have to get out of the way. Okay, so Engineered says, this is RE My Mountain Bike. Most e-bikes have that cruiser bike profile, but this NCM Prague, which is the one that I reviewed on our YouTube channel, retains the mountain bike hardtail design that I like. In my opinion, bikes in general should not be a form of transportation, but also be a form of exercise. The hardtail allows for great off-road trailing with the battery assist if needed, and I agree with that. I think I actually had range anxiety the other day with my e-bike because I forgot to charge the battery. But that was fine. It was fine. I got it down to 1. I was supposed to drain the battery once every 3 months and charge it to full. Not sure why. I imagine it's a battery management thing. So that's where we're at there. Go ahead.
All right. So another story here. They've started to deliver the Volkswagen ID3 cars in Norway. This is this story is a little August 28th. So
it's a little August 28th.
It's a story from August 28th, but I still haven't really started to see any reviews from Norway. But that's interesting. They've finally started to deliver the Volkswagen ID3.
Did you see Elon Musk? I found it interesting that Volkswagen, he was in Germany looking at their new factory there and just sort of doing a PR sort of trip. And the Volkswagen CEO invited him over to Volkswagen. So they have their own airport, don't you know? Mm-hmm. So his private plane landed there and he drove around in, was it an ID3 or an ID4?
No, it was an ID3.
Yeah, and they videoed it. And what do you think of that? I mean, that's something we should be talking about. No, I think it's probably on our schedule to talk about anyway.
Yeah, well, Volkswagen, as we have mentioned, they do seem to be the one legacy automaker that's taking this the most seriously. They seem to have committed the most amount of cash. They have a new regime in place, which is separate from the Dieselgate regime. So, they're trying to set a new tone for Volkswagen. They seem to be pretty serious about making electric cars. They've said lots of nice things about Tesla, which is probably one of the reasons why Elon Musk went to go see them. And it's and then there was also a story, further story about the VW CEO recently drove the Tesla Model Y and had lots of nice things to say about that.
Yeah, I sure want a Model Y. I'm looking forward to the future when I can buy one cheap. You know, the thing about electric cars is a lot of them are losing their value, but the Teslas are not. And they're kind of like computers because there's always new tech that comes out to replace them. Like cars. Well, that's not true. Cars are getting new tech, and I actually was motivated to buy a new Prius because of the new safety features such as emergency braking and lane keep assist. And I was thinking my son was going to start driving, and I was thinking, well, do I want, I was thinking, what happens if somebody dies and I didn't go for the new tech? And it might have saved. This is like gets into your head. And so I've been thinking about that. So new cars have that sort of new safety features, but generally cars are cars. They're trying to squeeze every ounce of energy efficiency out of them they can, but they're not changing. Brian, the show on YouTube this week, we do have all of our shows are archived there. We only have a few shows. We're now on 29. They're all there on YouTube. However, this show will only have the first half hour up on YouTube, and you'll be able to see me from my bedroom trying to do a show. So it'll be the first half hour, and you'll miss the lightning round. The lightning round is coming up later in the show, where I put a plethora of clean energy headlines, throw them at Brian, and see how he responds. It's exciting, and Brian, the listeners and now viewers are clamoring for it.
Okay, can we get to my favorite segment, the green energy pet peeves?
Okay, we don't have an intro for it. So
what?
No. You could have given me some heads up. I could have made one. Okay, clean energy pet peeves. Here's Brian.
That's perfect. We don't need more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of a dumb one, but electric cars don't need a radiator, so they tend to not have a grill. So where we live in the world, if you drive your car on the highway in the summer, you get a lot of bugs splattered on the car. And I've discovered that with an electric car, it's more than twice as bad because there's no radiator, there's no grill at the front. It's insane how many bugs get splattered on the front of the car, and it takes forever to clean them off. So that's my green energy pet peeve.
So you were trying to clean bugs off from your trip? Was that right?
Yeah, and I go to the car wash and I spray on you spray on this bug remover first, but it's not powerful enough. So I did a search on the internet, and the system I came up with is you use a bounce dryer sheet and some water, and that has just enough abrasion to get the bugs off, but doesn't wreck your paint. So it still takes a long time, and it's a pain in the ass, but that system seems to work.
Bounce dryer sheets are used for so many weird things. We use them to keep mice out of the camper in the winter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, what's in those things? Do I want to know? Maybe I don't. Don't send us letters. I don't want to know, because my wife uses them all the time with her clothes and the kids' clothes. I only wear athletic gear being an athlete, and we can't use those with clothes that are meant to breathe. So, Brian, I'm going to get now to Tony Seba's appearance on the BBC Business radio program, and I'm just going to start it off with this.
To produce 1 kilo of protein was $1 million. Today, it's $100 per kilo. We estimate that the cost will drop to about $10, so we'll match the cost of cow proteins by 2024, 2025.
So 80% of cheeses right now, 80 to 90% of cheeses in the world have precision fermentation used instead of the natural fermentation, which is, yeah. And, even for some French cheeses, most not French cheeses, but of course the BBC had to ask about that.
There were 10 experts, I think, invited along, and 8 of them were from very big and august institutions, large oil companies, departments of government, big NGOs. And they all pretty much had the same straight line forecast for the adoption of solar, renewables and electric vehicles, forecasting maybe 10, 20% adoption by 2050. And I'll never forget Tony getting up and saying, look, this isn't how disruption works. It's not slow and linear. It's an S-curve. This thing is over by the early 2030s.
So, yeah, there was this big government and industry meeting with all these tycoons, and Tony Seba was there. That's how he met his partner. That's his partner there. I'm sorry, I can't remember his name, and I've lost my note on him. But, yeah, and the idea is that this is how the world thinks. And I remember a few years ago, these predictions for 2050 being 1% EV adoption, literally, by the International Energy Agency and things that really guide the energy markets. And look at where we are now. In some countries, it's, I don't want to use extreme countries necessarily, like Norway, where it's like over 50%, but there are some countries that are 6.7 and 8% already. And that is really going to accelerate in this decade. So he's saying that a lot of their precision fermentation stuff is going to be cost parity by 2024, 2025 in that area. And that means that agriculture and the emissions from it will start to shift. We'll start to see shifting this decade. Question I had, Brian, I don't know if you have any comments, but the question I had was, and I think you brought this up vaguely last week, was what about things like steak? What they're doing now is they're using enzymes to give the blood taste. It's the same. It is actually the same enzyme in a cow, except it's artificially made. And what they're saying is that enzyme will be made cheaper, but now you have to have texture for it. So you put it with plant-based foods, right? Well, they're working. That's only one half of the story. They're working on actually making fake meat with muscles and tendons in the lab that will eventually be cheaper too. And I have a clip here.
So how far away are we from having a nice, juicy cut of steak made this way?
So there are 2 main technologies that are going to disrupt steaks. One is precision fermentation itself, so that like Impossible Burger, you make a protein and you add it to, for instance, plant-based substrate, and you make a burger. So about half of cow sales are actually ground beef. And that's the part that is going to be disrupted soon. What is not easy to grow in the lab is things like ligaments and muscles to give the texture of the actual beef. The other technology is cellular agriculture or cell-based meats. You grow in a lab the whole meat. In that, in our estimation, is going to take more like 6, 7, 10 years to be ready from a technology perspective and also from a cost perspective.
Yeah. So is that news to you? Because I wasn't following that part of the story.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Certainly ground beef is easier to replicate than a steak, but also, yeah, if it's 50% of the market, that's, even if they don't get to the steaks, that's still a huge disruption.
It is. That alone would, and especially, it's incredible. And I know people might be starting to getting sick of us talking about it, but it's a big deal, and it certainly affects the climate.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, we're going to have to say goodbye to our YouTube viewers. Be sure to check out the rest of the podcast, where we'll have the lightning round and all kinds of other wonderful things.
All right, so one other news story here. Norway plans to drill for oil in untouched Arctic areas. We often talk about Norway because they're leading in many green technologies like electric vehicles, but they're funding a lot of it with fossil fuels. So slightly disappointing news here that Norway's planning to expand into the Arctic drilling oil, unfortunately.
I wonder how long it's going to take them to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
I'm just thinking about timing. Like, it's incredible the timing of everything that's going on. I don't know how the pandemic affects it too, but it seems to be slowing things down. Brian, it seems like the pandemic has slowed and shut down half the world, but the green revolution has not stalled. Like if you look at car sales have been killed overall. There's been a handful that have been successful, like 3 or 4, but electric vehicle sales are going strong and still expanding where everything else is stalling. So I just wonder if development oil and gas is been mercifully for their own good slowed, so that we'll have more time to catch up in the clean energy side, and they will not have so many stranded assets, and maybe a better realization of what's coming, and it won't broadside them.
Yeah, no, as we talked about a bit last week, for cars, there's 2 markets, fossil fuels and electric, and fossil fuel is going to shrink for the next decade while the EV market is going to expand. So really all of the green technology falls into that camp. There's going to be less coal. There's going to be less natural gas. Like all the fossil fuel things are going to continue to shrink. And the pandemic seems to have accelerated in many ways, or exaggerated that thing, the green stuff growing and the fossil stuff dying.
Okay, well, I want to get to Tony Seba's and the ReThinkX recommendations for moving forward, given everything that they've been saying and predicting. And remember, a lot of what they predict is based on price, so it's economics. So if you can make food cheaper and cheaper, then why would you buy, E. coli tainted beef when you can buy fake beef that tastes the same or has infinite variations of flavor and texture, soon to be. That's by 2030, by the way. So, okay, here's what he's saying. First of all, get out of the energy business. That means the government should get the hell out of the energy business. They should not be Sask Power, and they should not be buying pipelines like the Canadian government recently did. And even mines. And I just read today, Brian, that mining is down. So it's just like Tony is like already, and this is not pandemic related, it's like people have been mining less lately.
Yeah, and I guess that is something we discussed briefly. It's more of these materials will be garnered through recycling. So yeah, mining is probably on a steady downward trend now too. So
we want to remove strict regulations on connecting to the grid. In Australia, I noticed where it's ridiculous how much solar is in Australia. I forget the figure. It's like 29% of homes have rooftop solar, and that's growing. And one of the things that they did to make it cheaper is that they removed the restriction on connecting to the grid. Like they made it, that's part of the deal when you get rooftop solar is you have to jump through hoops, or your solar company does. Mm-hmm. So if you can make that, this all sounds like right-wing stuff. Isn't that hilarious? It's like remove restrictions and have no government involvement. But listening deeply to some of their thoughts, they're not necessarily right-wing at all, the people who are coming up with this. But this is what they say: because of the economics, but you also want to speed things up because you have that climate tipping point. They think it's going to take care of things by 2050 for sure, and we're going to meet our and exceed our Paris Accords just because of the economics of clean technology. However, connecting to the grid is expensive, so remove that. They say it should be as easy to connect to the grid as it is to connect to the internet. And you should smarten up the grid, make it easy for people to connect within 24 hours. So that's one recommendation. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I guess your utility, like somebody still has to run it. So they have to create a grid management system at the top that makes all of that possible first, right?
I guess so. I mean, the idea is that we're all going to be not only energy producers, but we're going to have power when you need it, when the grid needs it. We'll have electric cars doing two-way power. We'll have power wall type things in our houses, because that's going to become a lot cheaper. Everybody's going to have an electric car. The technology will be there for two-way charging to put power back into the grid if you want, and that's massive. So that's my thinking. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's, I don't know, the grid, it's like we're still set up in most places, I think, where there is a central controlling utility, and that's just going to slowly have to kind of fade away. So maybe eventually the grid will be so decentralized that there doesn't have to be one utility that controls everything. We'll control from house to house eventually, I think.
Okay, well, I'll get some comments from you on these other recommendations. I'll try to go through them quickly. Set and signal clear intentions to provide clarity and certainty to investors, businesses, and consumers through targets for adoption of new technologies and restrictions on old. For example, signpost a ban on gasoline or diesel vehicle sales from 2025 and the use of such vehicles from 2030. Signal plans to ban diesel generators in urban and suburban areas by 2025. Thoughts?
Yeah, things like, apparently diesel generators are a huge thing, particularly in the U.S., where the grid can be unreliable in many places. But yeah, they're terrible polluters. So stuff like that. It's kind of like the lawnmowers, right? Like we need to get rid of that kind of thing.
Transition the centralized one-way electric power grid to a networked multi-way grid.
Well, I think, that's just what we were just talking about. Eventually, we won't even need necessarily a central utility. Everybody will be their own utility, I guess. Each home will be a computer that talks to the other computers, just kind of like the internet, like you were saying.
So ensure that new build solar, wind, and battery capacity built around the centralized electric power grid is adaptable to the fully decentralized energy system that will emerge. Equally, encourage standards to ensure that a charging network for privately owned electric vehicles is ready for the emergence of shared autonomous vehicles. Do you know what that means?
What does that mean?
Well, I don't know what it means. I think it means that we need to be... I don't know the actual logistics of charging an autonomous taxi fleet. I mean, because you don't necessarily want them to be all in a garage downtown to have to pull in there to charge. They should be... throughout the community, I'm guessing, and maybe even on the side of a road. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, years ago, there was like a demonstration video from Tesla where they were trying to figure out a robotic arm that would insert the charging thing, and we haven't heard anything more about that. So in the short term, I'm guessing like if Tesla starts a robotaxi fleet, that they would have attendants at the supercharger stations to, get the cars in and out. So you'd have to hire a human there and not necessarily in the cars, which will drive themselves.
This one's obvious. The government recommendation is to lead by example in their own procurement programs. For example, all government buildings should install solar. What's taking so long for that? And battery storage. transportation, governments, public transportation agencies, public schools, and postal systems should all be doing this. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think as we've maybe talked before, it is happening, it seems, more at the civic level. Local governments are a bit smaller and more agile.
That's right.
And also concerned about the bottom line. Like, civic governments don't always have that much power to collect taxes. It's typically property taxes. They're only... So, they're always looking for ways to improve their bottom line and can probably do it through wind and solar.
All right, the next one's interesting, and it says, don't invest in old infrastructure. I was talking to my son about this because he wants to next year get into civil engineering, and I'm trying to foresee the future for him because by the time some people who are going into university next year, by the time they get spat out of there, the world could start to be a different place, and that's a very risky thing. I mean, just with AI and things like that, doing some jobs that haven't been done before. So it's just a cautionary thing for my kids in the 2020s. So the UK government is planning to spend 100 billion euros on a high-speed rail link that would be obsolete before it is finished in the early 2030s. This is what Tony is saying in his think tank. And if you look at the one in California, it's billions of dollars over budget. It's taking for... we'll probably have like teleportation by the time that thing's done. So they said instead of spending 100 billion euros on that, they are suggesting that they repurpose 2 lanes of highway that will no longer be needed to run cars for autonomous electric road trains for a fraction of the cost. That is... I don't know specifically what that looks like. Can you imagine what that might look like? Because he says the technology that is already there is good enough already. And I think it means just like, in the example of semis, they would, you'd have 3 of them tailing each other automatically, and they would sort of benefit from the wind drifting of that or whatever. And that would be the same with trains, but on a highway. Now, you could go quite fast. If the technology of autonomous vehicles got very good, I could see a day 20 years from now where they would allow 200-kilometer-an-hour trips if everybody had an autonomous vehicle, or if they ruled it that way. Or if, this highway was an autonomous-only highway and you could go 200 kilometers an hour because the machine was safer than the driver. But that's a pretty bumpy ride.
Well, we had that story last week about Alberta looking into doing a hyperloop between Calgary and Edmonton, which is a high-speed tube train. And I love that idea because it means, you could go from Calgary to Edmonton in probably 20 minutes. And, but what you're saying is, like the, autonomous electric vehicles being able to go very fast will probably, be great to have a hyperloop, but the cheaper solution is to have high-speed cars just using the highway that we already have. I mean, maybe we can have both, but, definitely there's a future where intercity travel will be possible at, much higher speeds.
So he's also suggesting, and this is going to be controversial and honestly politically impossible in Canada, no bailouts of old tech during the transition. Well, we've already bought a pipeline. Thank you very much. Remove subsidies and protection currently given to fossil fuels. So that would be cutting them loose and letting them die. And, Tony is well aware that this is going to create social upheaval in various countries, and Canada being one of the ones because we're so reliant and we don't adopt well. He says some of the countries that will transition well will be Israel and Singapore because they're very adoptive countries. They've been able to make changes quickly. And the new world order that is coming, the age of freedom, as they have penned it, says that everything's going to be local and, because you won't need coal, you won't need oil, you won't need food from other jurisdictions if it can all come from your jurisdiction. He thinks that China is not going to dominate, but actual cities will dominate. There could be a city in China that dominates, or Israel could dominate. But the old guard, like the United States and Canada, is going to fail. And it needs to wake up and start looking at the future and setting policies for that. So, but I don't, do you have any idea how we could possibly, at this point, when the oil industry is struggling, say, you know what, subsidies you already have, we're not going to give you more, we're going to take away everything. because you are the past. Like, we live in oil country.
Yeah, it's always going to be different here in the midst of oil country. I mean, it's an impossible hand in many ways that the politicians have been dealt. Obviously, we should let all that stuff go, but easier said than done.
And he says, allow the unviable incumbent businesses to go bankrupt, but protect people through policies to retrain, financial and healthcare support, and to access social capital through the transition. So, yeah, that's the left-wing part of their argument, is not let the people, suffer to take care of them, but they need to let the incumbent business, because any money thrown at these old technologies, he says, is like throwing money in a black hole. It's just, that pipeline, what's the price tag on that? Billions and tens of billions?
In the billions, for sure.
And gone down the tube. Like, we don't need to do that. And we could be using that for, but that was for political reasons. And, I just don't know what's going to happen to Canada. I'm scared. I think, we have a Wexit movement here where people want the West to break away from Canada. Well, things are going to get a lot worse 10 years from now if the agricultural disruption takes place and an oil disruption. I remember with agriculture, our potash will be needed less, and that's one of the few things we have. So unless there's a nuclear arm race and we start selling our uranium, we're going to really have to diversify, or we're going to be a wasteland full of people with guns shooting each other.
But like I say, it's a no-win situation because, Trudeau spent, was it $4.5 billion on that pipeline? That sounds about right.
Sure.
And then, in the next days in the news, he was getting all kinds of criticism for not supporting the fossil fuel industry enough.
Yes, and to this day.
I was baffled by that.
What more can you do?
It's a no-win situation.
You spent $4.5 billion on a pipeline. That's not, nothing he can do is going to be enough politically, because things are tough and they need an enemy. He is also suggesting, the think tank is suggesting, create mobility to help people move to different locations with better job and quality of life opportunities. Small towns will suffer even more. Possibly, but they can also expand because they'll have everything they need right in the town if they start building up.
Yeah, that's certainly the role of government, to try and help look after people. Every once in a while, you'll hear a story. I remember one from Germany about how they're working to transition the coal workers, the coal miners, into clean industries because, they're shutting all that stuff down. So hopefully people get taken care of so they can move them from dirty jobs to clean jobs. But, also, again, easier said than done.
Well, here's something that we've been talking about. They're also suggesting temporarily, selectively, and minimally subsidize critical legacy fossil fuel-based generation capacity. This is electricity, as it becomes uneconomic. So I think what they're saying is they don't want to have the old power systems collapse and go out of business and leave us with a lack of power as we build up the new system. So they want to build a bridge to the new system. So that's an interesting aspect that I hadn't thought about. These people are thinking of a lot of things that really aren't thought about all the time. So create debt relief programs to help small businesses, individuals, and others with a value chain to exit their incumbent industries. So help them exit. Maybe we're going to start seeing that because there's a budget coming out 2 weeks from today. By the way, it's 13 days to Battery Day, and 2 weeks today, the government of Canada is coming out with a supposed green budget. They've said that before, though. Remove or resist the fight back from the incumbent industries and mindsets in the form of phony science, lobbying, regulatory capture, and disingenuous demands to protect jobs and influence public opinion when they really seek to protect their own financial position. And God, we know that's going on right now, don't we?
Yeah, for sure.
Brian, we've come to that point of the show. It's time for the lightning round.
The Clean Energy Show lightning round.
Now, I'm legally obligated, Brian, to ask you 3 times, are you ready?
I am ready.
Are you sure you're ready?
I'm sure I'm ready.
Are you absolutely certain?
Wait a minute. Okay, I'm ready.
Uber announces $800 million to accelerate transition to electric cars, but only aims for 100% electric by 2040. Come on!
Yeah, well, maybe charitably they're giving themselves, under promise, over deliver. Let's just say that.
You are being extremely kind to these bastards. And that's what they are. They're bastards.
I'm an optimist.
Come on. You could do it by 2030. Even that would be questionable. Come on. Because these cars, yeah. So Uber just offered Chevrolet Bolts. We were talking about whatever happened to the Bolt. Well, they're offering Bolts for greatly reduced incentive to Uber drivers if you want to buy a Volt, which is cool. I mean, if you were going to buy a new car and really dedicate yourself to being an Uber driver, you would make more money because I think Lyft charges extra to have an electric vehicle, to have a ride in an electric vehicle, even though
and I saw that story about the Bolt. I guess, they don't have huge demand. Like, they don't even make a lot of those, but they're having to make discounts to sell them. That's not a great sign.
No, it's not. Not good. Not good. You have to be. This is a weird market for electric cars, and for God's sake, people, make your over-the-air updates because, or you're going to find yourself left behind by the people who aren't doing that. So, U.S. battery builder QuantumScape raises $1 billion aiming to win the EV battery race. The 10-year-old solid-state battery builder has received more than $1 billion from investors, including that jackass Bill Gates and VW. Do you know what Bill Gates did this week?
Yeah, he had some weird comments about electric semis will never work.
Electric semis will never work, and he mentioned all the electric cars in the world except Tesla. And he used to drive a Model X. I don't know what his deal is. I'm starting to think he doesn't want, he's jealous. That's the easy way to go.
There's some kind of weird feud between him and Elon Musk because Musk has said in public something like, "Oh, yeah, I met Bill Gates. He didn't seem very smart." So I don't know what's going on there, but for some reason they hate each other.
Well, if they didn't before that comment, they do now, because that's not what you say to Bill Gates. Besides, Bill is very busy destroying the world, don't you know? With the virus, so that he can make even more money and give less of it away. So Tesla Model Y, the real-world MPGe, exceeds the early production Model 3 data show. So it's more efficient than the first Model 3. Did you hear about that one?
Wow, no, I didn't.
So talk about progress. Things are moving very quickly. Sometimes they're very subtle with things like that. So another headline I read was power companies are hindering the move to green energies. This is something we touched upon last week because they are not wanting to move forward. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's nothing new to add. It's just, it's a weird situation because every country, every province, every state, there's so many players in this game, so many different utilities with different ideas, and it's hard to get everybody on the same page, and some are going to be more progressive than others, basically.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left, so I have to be quick here, but this affects you because you were briefly as rich as Bill Gates a couple of weeks ago.
Briefly before the Tesla stock tanked this week.
Tesla is excluded from the S&P 500 reshuffle despite being worth 9 times all three new firms that were the combined wealth of all three of the new firms that were included and added.
Yeah, and that seemed to be maybe one of the things that affected the stock price heading down. Also, Tesla sold 5 billion new shares, so that probably affected the price. But it's kind of a nothing story. I mean, they will eventually be added to the S&P 500. It's not really a negative or a positive story. None of us knows the inner workings of the committee that decides on these things, and they could be in it tomorrow for all we know, but they will be eventually, so I don't think it's a big deal.
Okay, I'm going to throw this headline at you. Elon Musk raising the popularity of space travel like he raised the popularity of electric cars. Do you agree?
Yeah, it's funny. I was watching, what was it, a documentary recently I can't think of what it was, but it was something. I listened to an audiobook about the making of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the author, but it's the most recent book about the making of that movie. There's been several over the years, but a new one came out within the last couple of years.
Just a minute. I have to stop you for a second.
Ryan's Movie Corner.
Go on.
Thank you. Yes, what was I thinking to go ahead without that? But there's this book where they're interviewing all the people involved in the making of 2001. It came out in 1967. Came out before the moon landing, but it came out in the midst of the big space race. And so they were trying to project ahead to the year 2001 and what is it going to be like? And of course, there's colonies on the moon. There's regular flights to the moon. This is the world that they came up with. And several people said that was really based on the trajectory from the 60s. If the U.S., if NASA had continued on the same path, then we would have had all of that stuff by 2001. It turns out after a couple, trips to the moon, public lost interest, it was too expensive. And so the space race kind of died for a long time. So it was really interesting to hear all of these people comment on this, how it's slowed down. The space race has slowed down. And these are interviews that he, conducted 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But it really has changed. It's in the last, SpaceX is launching rockets like every other day, it seems. So it feels like we're getting back onto that trajectory that was there in the 60s.
I tell you, seeing that Tesla Roadster in space really blew my mind. And
that was completely amazing. Yeah.
It's just, I read about it for months in advance, but, the actual doing of it and the visuals were just amazing. And now back to the lightning round. South Korea to boost EV numbers to 1.3 million by 2025. That's 4 years.
Yeah, well, is that a lot? I'd have to think about that.
Okay. The lightning round doesn't allow for thinking, Brian. This is why you have to be nimble.
Damn it.
Okay, VWC, screw it. We're moving on. You failed. VW CEO confirms no Tesla deal on the making. Would you have wanted one, Brian Stockton?
No, I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it's all hands on deck. Everybody's got to make the most electric cars, the most batteries. Hopefully VW has enough of their own supply. Tesla currently doesn't have enough extra supply. It's a lot of this is just about the supply of batteries. So, if a partnership in the future makes sense, that's great. But until then, it's good to have that competition.
Plug-in share of the Netherlands market is at 21% this summer. EV sales are way up, and the auto market as a whole is down 22%. Number one is the Tesla Model 3, and just 7 vehicle sales behind is the Kia Niro EV. So it's just 7 cars in the Netherlands behind the Tesla Model 3. And after that is the SAIC, SAIC MG, the Chinese state-owned car company in UK. What do you think about the Niro being number 2? I haven't heard much about the Niro lately.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's one of those cars that we considered. Of course, we can't buy an EV one here where we are, but it's on the same platform as the Kona EV. But I tend to mention the Kona more because that's just the sort of style that I prefer. The Niro to me just doesn't look that great as a car. It's a little bit more clunky, but it's a really good car. The Kona EV and the Niro EV, it's a really good car. That's a decent range, performance, and price. They've just got to make more of them.
All right, I'm going to go back to something we talked about before. GM partners with Uber to help drivers buy the Chevy Bolt EV with deep discounts. Now, I'm for this because it gets people into electric cars and showcases GM's technology. So, what do you think?
Nothing to add, just more EVs, the better.
Okay, and finally, Brian, I want to talk about the Nikola GM deal. What do you think about that? Now, here's the deal. I'm really, and, if you read Fred on Electric's take on it, it's Nikola is like a Ponzi scheme of some sort. This is the the semi-truck maker, which originally had a natural gas jet turbine on the back of their vehicles, powering a battery to create electricity for electric fleet. Then they said they're going to switch to hydrogen. Now, I'm a skeptic on hydrogen for smaller uses, including semi-trucks, although I think long-distance semi-trucks will take some compromise, but drivers do have to stop every so many 100 miles anyways. But anyway, so what they were touting is that they had this new technology, this new hydrogen technology and converters and inverters and all this stuff. And yes, and their stock was high, and then GM partners with them and to make a pickup truck. And what are they going to do? They're going to use batteries from GM, and they're going to use hydrogen products from GM. So what does that leave Nikola? It's nothing.
It's a little bit bizarre. It really seems like a desperation move from General Motors. Nikola, they don't even have any working prototypes of anything, do they?
I don't think so. No, it was they claimed, there's another thing, is they claimed it was a real prototype they had on display, and it turned out to be absolutely fake. And it even had hydrogen written on the side of it and stuff like that. I'm very, I was pro Nikola for a while. I was happy about them. And then when the Tesla semi-truck came out, I was following Trevor Milton. Is it Milton? Trevor Milton on Twitter. And the CEO of the company, and he was like a child bashing Elon Musk, saying, no, that's impossible. All these specs are impossible. He's lying. And it was just like a raging Trump or something. He was just, it totally lost respect for him and unfollowed him at that time. And because, you can say what you want about Tesla, but they don't screw around with specs. They meet or exceed their specs. They don't underperform.
So far they've delivered on what they've said.
And we expect that's going to be coming. And like I say, Battery Day is 13 days away, and it's going to be a hell of a day. So that's it for this week's show, Brian. I want to thank everyone for watching on YouTube. You go to YouTube and watch us, and you can also do our show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. All podcasts have to beg their listeners to rate and review their podcasts on Apple Podcasts. It always helps us. And tell your friends about the show, and see us on Twitter. We'll see you, Brian Stockton, next week on the Clean Energy Show.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.